The deck was not merely cold. It was a thief of heat that climbed through Sienna Okonkwo's palms, up his wrists, and into the old scar at his elbow, where shrapnel had once nested like a bad memory. The courier skiff bucked under emergency mag clamps hard enough to rattle his teeth, and the lock siren did not wail in a steady emergency tone. It stuttered in clipped bursts. 6 short, 2 long, 6 short again. The cadence station mechanics learned in their first month because it meant interference at a hatch seal. Not turbulence. Tampering. The air tasted of ozone, antiseptic foam, and singed insulation, braided together into the smell of systems being hurt faster than they could self-correct. He did not panic. Panic burned oxygen and options. He set his right hand flat to the deck plating to feel vibration through metal instead of trusting the jittering panel lights, then ran the convoy ritual his body remembered even when his mind wanted to sprint ahead. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. He counted silently on finger taps against his thumb. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold. Out. On the second cycle, his pulse dropped from hammering to merely loud. On the third, he could hear individual sounds inside the noise. The hiss of a pressure compensator overworking, the metallic chitter of a service drone trapped in an error loop somewhere aft, the dull thunk-thunk of cargo restraints flexing under strain, but not yet failing. He pushed himself to his boots, checked suit seals by touch, and then checked them again by panel readout because touch lied under adrenaline. Neck ring locked. Wrist seams green. Spine coupler green. Microfilter cycling at 83%. Not ideal, still functional. Hull pressure sat lower than it should, above danger, trending down in uneven drops that suggested either a slow leak or somebody teasing an access valve from the other side and stopping whenever sensors swept. He swore under his breath. Not dramatic, just tired, and keyed the cargo spine map on his forearm screen. The skiff schematic bloomed in amber lines over his skin. 1 long central corridor, 2 side maintenance trunks, emergency ballast under Deck C, and a cluster of sealed diplomatic berths he had not been told were occupied until 12 minutes before launch clearance. The clamps hit again, heavier this time, and every loose bolt in the wall bins answered with a thin metallic rattle like teeth in winter. He braced, waited for the swing to settle, and pulled the manifest window into view. His name glowed at the top in institutional gray contractor class, maintenance certified, hazard stipend pending review, as always. Under cargo classifications came the line that made his stomach drop in a clean, sudden fall. Diplomatic transfer. Vulpine hegemony. 1 envoy. 4 juvenile dependents. Reroute authorization stamped by dock administration 7 minutes prior. 7 minutes. No negotiation log. No priority escort. No noble guard detail. Just his skiff, his debt-marked contract, and 5 breathing passengers from a caste tier that treated human workers as necessary machinery with legal signatures. "Who did you annoy?" he muttered to the empty corridor, because sarcasm occupied the same headspace fear did and was cheaper to maintain. No one answered. The ship answered instead with a shower of amber warning glyphs and 1 red icon pulsing over dock ring 9. He moved. The service conduit swallowed him in dim strips of backup lighting, blue, white, and intermittent, turning every pipe seam into a shadowed joint and every hanging cable into something organic in his peripheral vision. The deck here was ribbed, composite, patched in 3 shades from 3 different maintenance eras. His boots knew the rough sections by memory from other runs on other borrowed hulls. The places where traction held, and the places where oil mist made liars of careful feet. He kept his left shoulder near the wall, right hand free, chin down to keep the sting of foam residue out of his eyes. At each junction, he paused for 2 breaths and mapped blind corners, camera arcs, and airlock choke points, not because he expected an ambush, but because old convoy habits never retired cleanly. War taught him that emergencies arrived twice, once as noise, once as paperwork assigning blame. The station feed crackled in and out on the maintenance channel, mostly static and clipped code. Civilian traffic reroutes, dock taxes. One bored voice from transit control repeating, "Remain in assigned lanes," in 3 languages and a tone that promised fines more than safety. He muted it after 8 seconds. The skiff's own AI, a stripped maintenance model with the personality of a filing cabinet, flashed text across his sleeve. Lock integrity degraded 14%. He thumbed a response without slowing. Show source variance. Another flash. Variance distributed. Non-accidental pattern suspected. Even the filing cabinet sounded uneasy. By the 2nd week of this contract cycle, he had started checking every rewrote order for handwriting hidden inside code. Somebody always profited when routes changed at the last minute, and profit never rode in economy cabins. A hard left took him past cargo netting, where vacuum-rated crates hung in suspension like sleeping beasts, each stamped with custom seals from worlds whose gravity he had never felt under his own feet. He scanned tags out of reflex, alloy ingots, med gel, agricultural enzymes, 2 sealed diplomatic trunks with biometric locks keyed to species he could not spoof, even if he had the nerve. No sign of breach, no sign of theft. The anomaly remained social, which made it more dangerous than loose wiring. Machinery followed physics. People followed incentives and prejudice, and old law dressed in new fonts. His earpiece chimed once, then dumped a compressed packet from station legal into his local buffer. He almost ignored it. Legal packets at this hour meant liability waivers thick enough to smother a fire. The top line loaded before he could swipe away. Temporary carrier liability. Tier 3 contractor. Diplomatic presence clause. Fine print crawled beneath like larvae. If the passengers claimed environmental negligence, fines. If their cargo seals failed under his watch, fines. If quarantine was declared and he had not documented every hatch cycle with exact time code, fines and detention pending tribunal. He laughed once, short and sharp. Bureaucracy, he told the conduit wall. Longer than orbital winter and twice as cold. The wall, in classic institutional professionalism, offered no rebuttal. Another shudder ran through the skiff. Then a hollow boom rolled along the spine from aft to bow, the sound of pressure doors slamming in sequence. He felt it in his sternum more than his ears. Secondary lockout. Somebody had either initiated a safety cascade or tripped one by forcing hardware where software wanted permission first. He broke into a controlled jog, breath measured, hands sliding along numbered conduit markers. C14, C15, C16. The lights flickered in a rhythm that made depth perception unreliable, so he switched his visor to edge contrast mode and let the world redraw itself in hard outlines. Pipes bright, empty space black, heat signatures ghosting across bulkheads where power trunks still ran warm. At C19, he stopped dead. There, on the deck seam at the threshold to dock ring 9, sat a smear of antiseptic foam, crossed by a crescent imprint from a clawed boot, deep enough to tell him the wearer had put real weight down while moving fast. Not station security issue, not human. The print pointed inward, toward the diplomatic berth quarter. He crouched, touched 2 fingers to the foam, and felt residual warmth fading. Recent passage. Less than 5 minutes. He looked up at the hatch and listened. Beyond the metal, beneath the siren stutter and structural hum, came a layered sound. Small, rapid breathing in uneven counts and one larger breathing pattern held too steady to be natural, the way people breathed when they were forcing fear into obedience. It was not one set of lungs working in the dark. It was several. Sienna exhaled once through his nose and opened his toolkit, not for tools yet, but for the flat black scanner tucked under thermal tape. The device chirped quietly as it swept the hatch frame. Magnetic residue at the lock teeth. Trace compounds from shaped detonite, where no maintenance request had ever authorized explosives. He took 3 photos with timestamp overlays, encrypted them, and shoved the packet into triple redundancy. Local drive, skiff core, and external tribunal relay queue set to auto-transmit if his biometric signal dropped below life threshold. Paranoid procedure, his old supervisor had called it. Still breathing, he had called it back. He stood and rolled his shoulders, loosening tension before it locked his reaction time. The hatch control plate glowed amber. Waiting for authorization class he did not possess. He keyed in contractor override anyway, half expecting a rejection tone. The panel paused. Thought. Opened 1 inch with a hiss, like a knife being drawn slowly from a sheath. Cold air spilled through the seam, drier and sharper than the conduit air, carrying musk, copper, and the electric bite of overloaded shielding. The feed in his earpiece finally delivered the delayed passenger metadata, names in sequence, each line stamped with juvenile designation and diplomatic dependency protection, Terran Voss, Mev Voss, Soli Voss, Bryn Voss. Above them, primary passenger, Ambassador Regent Illyra Voss, Vulpine Hegemony, Transit Immunity Class Auric. His hand tightened on the hatch edge before he made it relax. A Regent. 4 kits. On a patched contractor skiff with lock tamper alarms and distributed pressure loss. That was not logistics. It was a setup. He slipped through the opening into dock ring 9, and the hatch sealed behind him with a final, deliberate click. The click behind him was not merely mechanical, it was a verdict, a thin metal period at the end of every option that involved retreat. Dock ring 9 had none of the rough honesty of the maintenance trunks. It was clean in the way expensive places got clean. Polished composite underfoot, recessed lights hidden in white channels, air scrubbed of grease and dust until every scent stood out like a flagged warning. He caught 4 at once. Sterile sealant from emergency foam, burnt polymer from a conduit short that had already been patched by autogel, fox musk, sharp and warm, threaded with stress hormones, and beneath it, faint but steady, powdered milk and citrus soap, the domestic smell of juveniles who had been packed for travel by someone who expected routine. Not this. He stood still and let his heartbeat count out against the hull hum. Right hand half raised in old convoy posture, empty palm visible in case someone behind the frosted partition had optics keyed to threat silhouettes. He did not call out yet. Procedure came first, and procedure had kept him breathing through worse rooms than this one. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. On the exhale, he indexed his body, the way combat medics had taught drivers who kept pretending they were fine. Jaw unclenched, shoulders lowered, fingers responsive, peripheral vision stable. Then he knelt, popped his toolkit, and ran a silent scan along the deck seam where dock ring 9 met the skiff spine. The scanner painted a soft grid across the floor. No active mine signatures, no thermal spike from shaped charge housings, no kinetic tripwire. He checked anyway with a mirror wand under the lip of the access plate, because trust belonged to people, not to first-pass diagnostics. Clean. The only live hazard in immediate reach was the climate regulator on the right wall, oscillating 3 degrees every 8 seconds in a cycle that would feel like ordinary chill to him and deep cold to smaller bodies. He thumbed the control panel, got a red denial glyph, and smiled without humor. "Contractor class," he murmured, "trusted to fix the system, not touch the thermostat." His sleeve display lit with text from the skiff AI. "Passenger compartment pressure, stable. Humidity low. Recommend hydration alert." He keyed back, 2 taps. "Cue hydration notice in court dialect and trade pidgin. Keep tone neutral." The filing cabinet intelligence took 2 seconds to comply, then projected a soft chime into the compartment beyond the frosted partition. Non-urgent, gentle, repeating once. He watched the shadow movement on the other side settle from sharp, clustered shapes into slower outlines. Someone had heard the tone and decided not to bolt. Good. Panic spread by geometry in enclosed spaces. If one body moved hard, the rest followed. He shifted left, kept his boots outside the painted threshold that marked diplomatic privacy under station accord, and finally pitched his voice low enough to carry without sounding like command. "Maintenance tech on deck. Name's Sienna Okonkwo. I'm not entering your compartment. I'm checking life support and route security." He let a breath pass, then added the practical detail that mattered most in rooms like this. "If you need water warmed or med packs thawed, say it now. Cold cycle in this ring is drifting." Silence met him for 3 beats. Heavy, but not empty. He heard fabric rustle. A small exhale that hitched on the end. Then an adult voice from behind the partition, female, clipped by training and held together by effort. "State your contract registry and issuing doc." He gave both numbers from memory, then angled his wrist so his display projected toward the frost glass, green contractor sig rotating with timestamp hash. No sudden motions. No stepping over lines. The station had a dozen species protocols, each with its own trigger gestures and mistakes that could become legal incidents by the minute. He had learned most of them from fines. "Received," the same voice said. Controlled, still formal, but the edge changed by half a degree. "Hold position." A juvenile whisper followed, too soft for words, then another whisper answering it. 4 breathing patterns, just as he had heard at the hatch, rapid, then slowing. He put that in his working memory and returned to the deck map. Survival logic was arithmetic under stress. Temperature, pressure, exits, power, social law. He drew a quick sequence on his forearm screen with a gloved fingertip. Stabilize environment, document tamper, establish corridor control, secure legal chain, then move passengers only if a harder threat forced it. Steps calmed him, because steps had endpoints, and endpoints were the closest thing the universe offered to mercy. 90 seconds later, the ring lights dimmed and rose in a diagnostic pulse. He looked up immediately. Not an attack pattern. A polling sweep from station grid asking each subsystem for integrity code. He watched response lag on panel 3, 0.9 seconds late, then 1.2, then back to baseline. Intermittent throttling, likely deliberate. Someone upstream wanted this section to feel like failure, without fully failing yet. The bureaucratic equivalent of tightening a wire around a throat and calling it policy maintenance. He opened the access nodule with a quarter-turn driver and checked the relay stack by touch. Warm on relay A, hot on B, see cool when it should have been warm. A bypass loop hidden inside legal hardware. Neat job, done by a technician with rank permissions and the patience to make sabotage resemble aging equipment. His jaw tightened. Then he released it and did what he always did when memory threatened to kick open old doors. He counted bolts aloud under his breath as he reseated a loose contact. 1 set, 2 set, 3. The words were barely sound, more vibration than speech, but rhythm kept his hands from shaking. By the 3rd count, the ring stopped flickering. By the 5th, the climate regulator flattened its oscillation and held 2 degrees warmer. On the other side of the partition, one of the small breathing patterns deepened into sleep cadence for 6 seconds, then popped awake again. Progress, not comfort. He closed the panel and backed away from the threshold. Environment stabilized for now, he said toward the frost glass. You've got a narrow, safe band. If it drifts again, tell me immediately. The female voice answered after a pause that felt like internal consultation. Acknowledged Technician Okonkwo. No title, no sneer, no performative gratitude, just acknowledged. In this sector, from that side of the class wall, it landed like an offered bridge plank. He moved on, because stopping to feel things in a compromised corridor was how workers got memorialized in forms. Dock ring. 9 was a crescent wrapped around the diplomatic berths, with 3 transparent observation panes that looked out toward station traffic and 2 armored service doors that led to utility ladders. Every 20 meters, a brass inlay marked jurisdiction. Station Civil Authority in 3 scripts, then beneath it, smaller. Diplomatic Privacy Supplement applies. Law etched into flooring like decor. He traced camera cones with his eyes and overlaid them against blind spots. Camera 9. A tracked clean. 9B had a dead wedge near the beverage alcove where an adult could hide if they compressed shoulders. 9C was physically intact but feeding old footage on a 6-second loop. He caught it because a floating dust mote repeated the same drift arc 3 times. He tagged the feed, copied it, stamped timecode, and pushed it to his tribunal queue. A confirmation returned almost immediately from remote archive. Evidence received. Chain verified. That small blue message did more for his blood pressure than any breathing drill. 3 days on this station had taught him its social topography better than most maps. Humans in patch jackets used ladder shafts and ate in machine canteen 4. First-tier passengers moved through glass promenades where scent diffusers erased labor. Security drones enforced both routes with equal politeness and very unequal assumptions. Here, in Ring 9, those assumptions collided. A human contractor with full physical access and no social legitimacy. A diplomatic family with legal shields and no control over the hull they had been pushed onto. Whoever authored this reroute understood that friction point exactly. If anything broke, blame would slide downhill. He checked the first utility door. Locked from central authority, as expected, but the lock teeth carried fresh scrape marks from manual override tools. Not his. Too narrow for his bits. Too deep for amateur work. He photographed, sampled residue, labeled packet. Tooling trace unknown. Possible internal access. Second utility door showed no tamper but had a pressure differential of 0.3 kilopascals against the corridor, meaning airflow was moving into Ring 9 from an unregistered source. He crouched and held a strip of thermal tape at the seam. The tape fluttered inward, paused, then twitched twice in a pattern that matched ventilation cycling from deck below. Someone had tied this ring's atmosphere to an external loop without declaring it. Not a direct kill mechanism. More subtle, more deniable, enough to destabilize comfort, fray juvenile sleep, and create medical pretext if officials wanted to argue relocation. Structural injustice with extra steps, he muttered, and the ring answered with the soft buzz of failing neon tube bulkheads over. He opened a channel to station maintenance control, priority low but logged. Contractor Okonkwo, Skiff Kestrel 17, reporting unfiled airflow link and falsified camera loop in Dock Ring 9. Request independent inspection crew and judicial observer. He expected static. Instead, he got a tired human voice, maybe mid-shift, maybe as buried in hierarchy as he was. "Control copies," the voice said. "Observer request is denied pending admin review. Inspection crew queued, ETA unknown. Keep your records clean, Tech." "Always do." "I can see that," the voice replied and cut out. Outcome logged, dismissive, but recorded. He filed it with the rest. By the time he finished the outer sweep, 14 minutes had passed since the hatch sealed behind him. Station time rolled to 0317 in the corner of his display, and somewhere in the ship's spine, a pump switched to backup mode, with a low groan, like an old beast settling its weight. He returned to the diplomatic threshold and stopped short of the privacy line again. The frosted partition still obscured faces, but he could see the shadows better now. One tall figure standing despite fatigue, and 4 smaller forms grouped tight around low luggage pods. His voice stayed steady. "Corridors mapped. 2 exits, both bad options right now. Main ring remains the safest position until inspection arrives or command clarifies route authority." He hesitated, not from uncertainty, but from the delicate math of respect and urgency. "I can set up a portable heat buffer outside your door and slide hydration packs through the service hatch. No entry required." A beat. Then the adult voice came back. Less formal, still guarded. "Do it." He nodded to the frost glass as if it were eye contact and turned to his kit, already sorting thermal blankets, battery cells, and the foldable buffer screen by color code and connector type, while the station around them kept humming its polished lie. He locked the foldable heat buffer into a shallow arc just outside the privacy line, clipped 2 battery bricks into the spine, and watched the mesh wake from gray to low amber, a soft thermal curtain that pushed chill back toward the corridor. The light coated his gloves in honey color and turned the brushed metal wall behind him into something almost domestic. Almost. Above it, the warning strip still pulsed amber every 10 seconds, patient as a metronome, reminding him the system considered all this temporary and suspicious. He knelt by the service hatch, cracked 2 hydration packs, checked the warmers with his thumb, then slid them through one at a time so no hand had to reach too far into unknown space. A small paw, rust red and shaking, darted out and grabbed the first pouch. Another followed, darker fur at the wrist, movement quicker, less afraid and more irritated at being afraid. 4 packs went in. 4 soft zipper sounds came back, then the tiny wet click of drinking valves. He listened without meaning to, cataloging rates the way mechanics cataloged leaks. 1 fast gulper, 1 cautious sipper, 1 trying to pace and failing, 1 not drinking at all. 4th pack still untouched. He said quietly to the partition, eyes on his toolkit instead of the frost glass. "If that one's nauseous, I've got plain ice chips." The adult voice answered with that same trained control, but closer now. "Not nausea. Sensory aversion." "Understood. I can warm broth concentrate instead. No protein additives." A pause then. "Accepted." He rose, moved to the galley niche built into the ring wall, and coaxed the emergency heater into cooperating with a maintenance bypass pin. The water cartridge shuddered, hissed, and committed. Steam lifted in thin strands that smelled faintly metallic, sterilized too many times by too many cycles. He mixed the concentrate, tested temperature against his wrist, and set the cup in the hatch tray. While he waited for it to be pulled through, he checked his evidence queue. Camera loop packet, lock scrape packet, airflow anomaly packet, control call, transcript. All chained, all mirrored. The quiet click of careful record-keeping steadied him more than prayer ever had. By 0322 station time, the corridor had settled into a deceptive calm. the kind that made tired workers trust it and pay later. The partition de-iced by degrees with a soft crackle, opacification fading from white to smoke to clear. He had expected an eye, maybe half a face. Instead, the entire inner panel unsealed and slid aside on magnetic rails. Ambassador Regent Elira Voss stepped into view in one fluid movement that was equal parts caution and command, and the corridor seemed to narrow around her. She was taller than him by a head, coat torn at the shoulder where ceremonial braid had been ripped loose, midnight fabric scorched along one flank, rank pins still aligned with almost hostile precision. Her ears were pinned flat against her hair, not in submission, but in pain management. Gold thread cuffs marked regent authority even under soot. One arm stayed angled behind her, shielding the interior where the kits clustered around travel trunks and folded blankets. The hand at her side was empty, claws sheathed, fingers stained with dried antiseptic and the dark matte residue of burned polymer. Her gaze hit him hard and assessing, amber irises ringed in black, the look of someone used to command decks and assassination reports and not in the habit of mistaking labor uniforms for harmless. "Technician Okonkwo," she said. Not a question. "Turn so I can see your spine coupler." He turned without argument. Authority recognized authority, and this was survival, not pride. He heard her take one step closer, heard the tiny shift of her breath as she read the maintenance sig burned into his harness plate, and the older serial scarred beneath it, where convoy service codes had been ground off but not fully erased. "Former military logistics," she said. "Former everything," he replied. Her mouth moved by a fraction, maybe irritation, maybe a nearly smile that had forgotten the habit. "Do not reduce your profile around me. I am not station customs." "Good," he said, then tipped his head toward the still pulsing warning strip. "Because station customs are allergic to context." Behind her, one of the kits made a sound halfway between a huff and a swallowed laugh. The tension in the doorway eased one notch. He got his first clear look past her shoulder. Taryn, likely oldest, sat upright with one forepaw wrapped in a travel scarf as a makeshift brace, jaw set in stubborn silence. Mev hovered near the luggage, ears flicking at every corridor noise, pupils blown wide with adrenaline he was trying to hide. Soli watched everything with unnerving stillness, one hand on Bryn's back as if counting breaths through fur. Bryn, smallest, had the untouched hydration pack beside his knee, and both hands pressed over his ears, eyes fixed not on Sienna, but on the ceiling lights as if listening to frequencies nobody else could hear. Elira noticed where Sienna looked and shifted her body half an inch to block the sightline, protective reflex clean and immediate. "State environmental risk in plain language," she said. "Cold drift is managed for now. Airflow's still wrong but not toxic. Camera coverage is compromised in one wedge and looped on another feed." He kept his tone practical, no flourish. "I've logged evidence to tribunal chain. No one enters here without your consent unless they bring hard authority and better paperwork than mine." "You assume paperwork restrains them." "I assume paperwork gives me something to hit back with." That earned him direct eye contact, sharp enough to feel like pressure. "You speak like someone who has lost to institutions before." He did not answer the history. He tapped his sleeve display and projected the corridor map between them. 2 exits, both currently lock-controlled upstream. If we're forced to move, left route is shorter, but exposed to camera blind. Right road is longer and colder, but easier to seal behind us. She scanned the map once and memorized it the way officers memorized fire plans. "You prepared this in 12 minutes? 14, he said. "I was taking my time." From inside the compartment, Taryn finally spoke, voice rough with suppressed pain, and the defensive pride of firstborns. He jokes when things are bad. Sienna glanced toward him. Only when things are medium bad. For truly bad, I complain about regulation font sizes. Mev snorted despite himself. Soli's mouth twitched. Bryn's shoulders dropped a fraction. Elira did not laugh, but the hard line of her jaw softened. You have children. It was not phrased as inquiry. He still answered. No, I've got niece duty twice a week and a lot of practice with scared people in small rooms. Scared people, she repeated, measuring the euphemism and accepting it. She extended her right hand then, formal, palm inward in fox diplomatic custom. Halfway through the gesture, a fine tremor ran through her fingers, too brief for anyone not looking directly at it to catch. She curled the hand into a fist, reset, and presented her left instead. Ambassador Regent Elira Voss. These are Taryn, Mev, Soli, and Bryn of House Voss. While we remain inside your hull, you will be addressed as Technician Guardian under Transit Clause. The title hit him harder than he expected. Guardianship language in her register was not decorative politeness. It was legal weight and social risk. He touched his knuckles to his chest in return, the closest human equivalent he could manage without mangling court protocol. Acknowledged, Regent. She held his gaze one more beat, then stepped back so he could see the kits again. Taryn requires proper splinting once your medkit is sterilized. Mev needs breathing pacing. Soli needs a task or she will start predicting disasters aloud. Bryn needs quiet. Her ears twitched once, betraying fatigue like a crack in armor. I need this corridor to remain under your control. He understood command language. He understood exhaustion hidden inside it even better. Then, we can both have one thing we want, he said. I keep the corridors stable. You keep them warm and inside the line. For the first time, her expression tipped towards something like dry approval. Negotiation with a contractor. My counsel would faint. Mine wouldn't voice you for it. Taryn made a choking sound that became a laugh he tried to smother in his scarf. The mood shifted enough for breath to return to the room. Sienna crouched by his kit and began laying out sterile wraps, splint foam, and sensor tabs in strict rows, each item placed where his hands could find it blind if the lights failed again. He narrated what he was doing as much for the kits as for himself. Blue wrap first, silver strip second. If anyone sees sparks from this heater, you tell me before it turns dramatic. If this tray tips over, that's not sabotage. That's me and gravity continuing our old argument. Gravity is winning, Mev whispered. Historically, yes, Sienna said. But I've got a strong legal case. Even Elira's ears lifted a little at that. The corridor answered with a soft thunk from the far utility door, one lock tooth settling deeper into place as pressure equalized. No alarm followed. No drone lights. Just the ship moving around them like a tired animal trying to find a position that hurt less. Sienna looked up, counted 3 breaths and chose not to elevate it yet. He logged the sound with a timestamp instead, because fear without documentation was just noise, and he had promised himself years ago that if he survived the wars, he would at least leave records cleaner than his memories. Technician Guardian, Elira said, voice lower now, meant for him alone, while the kits bent over their warm packs. If station authority attempts to separate my children under hygiene pretext or caste review, you will hear words you do not recognize. You will not wait for translation. You will lock this line and seal ventilation. There it was. The feared counterpart in full. Not clause and myth, but precise contingency doctrine sharpened by maternal terror. He met her stare without flinching, then handed Taryn a folded brace and kept his tone dry on purpose. A narrow bridge over deep water. I volunteered for solo freight because crates don't file complaints, he said. Tonight I got 4 minors, 1 regent, and a station that thinks policy is a substitute for ethics. So if anyone comes for your line, they can take a number. Mev laughed outright this time, startled by it. Soli exhaled. Bryn finally picked up the untouched hydration pack and took one careful sip while staring at Sienna, as if deciding whether he was real. Elira's gaze lingered on him, unreadable for a long second. Then she gave one small nod that carried the gravity of oath language without speaking it. Then hold your corridor, Okonkwo. He set his shoulders, adjusted the heater 2 degrees higher, and got to work. He started with Taryn because pain made brave children reckless, and reckless children turn narrow safety margins into catastrophe. He snapped a sterile sleeve over his gloves, warmed the splint foam between his palms, and crouched at the privacy line until the oldest kit offered his wrapped paw without being asked twice. Up close, the injury looked cleaner than he had feared. Swelling at the wrist joint, no obvious displacement, fur matted with antiseptic instead of blood. Taryn watched him with a fixed adult stare that belonged on a security officer, not someone who still smelled faintly of citrus shampoo. This will pinch first, then settle, Sienna said. You squeeze my forearm if it spikes. I don't need to squeeze. Then pretend you're doing me a favor. That got a thin, offended huff. Taryn squeezed anyway when Sienna aligned the paw and set the brace. Good pressure. Controlled. No yanking. No panic spiral. Sienna wrapped blue, then silver, then clipped a microsensor tab to the outer edge so his sleeve could track heat and perfusion. In his peripheral vision, Mev paced 3 steps. Turn. 3 steps. Turn. While Soli sat with Bryn and moved 2 fingers in a tiny rhythm against Bryn's shoulder blade, grounding him by touch. Elira stood over all of it like a ceremonial statue that had learned to breathe. She kept her weight on her left leg, right shoulder angled protectively toward the kits, coat hanging wrong, where torn braid had pulled seams out of line. When Sienna asked for the med scanner, she handed it to him with her left hand again. The right stayed close to her ribs, fingers flexing once as if around a phantom blade hilt. He pretended not to notice until he had reason that fit procedure. Regent, I need baseline vitals on everyone sharing this air volume, he said, voice neutral. If one body dumps stress hormones hard enough, Bryn will feel it. Her eyes narrowed, testing whether he was prying or planning. You are using my child as leverage for compliance. I'm using your child as engineering data. Mev stopped pacing. Soli looked up sharply. Taryn said through clenched teeth, He means that in a decent way. A small silence passed. Then Elira extended her right wrist at last, palm down, and Sienna saw the tremor clearly. Fine, fast oscillation riding under muscle control, worst in the index and thumb, damped by stubborn will. Not fear, not cold. Neural fatigue with a cost she was paying minute by minute. He touched scanner pads to her skin where fur thinned near the pulse point. The display bloomed with more red flags than his maintenance console had shown all night. Elevated catecholamines, cortisol high enough to keep anyone awake for days, microspike activity along motor pathways, and an unstable pattern in the upper neural band usually associated with shield interface feedback. He ran it twice in case of sensor error. Same result. You're overloaded, he said quietly so only she could hear. This isn't a sprain and grit situation. Her ears flattened. Do not diagnose me in front of my children. Then step 2 paces right and let me be polite. She moved, controlled and furious, and he rose with her. keeping his body between the kits and the readout. The corridor lights buzzed overhead. The heater mesh hummed softly at their knees. For a moment, they stood close enough that he could smell burned polymer under her ceremonial oils, and beneath that, the thin metallic scent of stress that every species seemed to share when it had run out of reserve. "What happened at transfer?" he asked. Before this, Doc. She watched him as if deciding which kind of danger he was. "An escort barge accepted our signal beacon 3 sectors early. Correct transponder. Correct challenge words. Correct hull calligraphy for my house." Her mouth tightened at the memory. The docking collar carried a shape charge array hidden inside ceremonial lantern mounts. They detonated on magnetic seal. Sienna held still, scanner cooling in his hand. She continued because she had decided continuing was less risky than letting him infer. "I deployed region signet shielding to absorb thermal scatter and fragment velocity," she said. The shield net was tuned for military deck spacing, not nursery density. 4 juveniles inside one field amplified feedback through Bryn's empathic channel. Her voice thinned for one beat, then hardened again. "I maintained the net until secondary hull separation. I have not had full motor control in my dominant hand since." Sienna glanced toward Bryn. The smallest kit sat rigid, eyes too wide, fingers pressed to his own ears, breathing shallow and fast as if every sound in the corridor arrived as pressure instead of noise. "Why no medward?" Sienna asked. "Because medwards report upward. Reports trigger reviews. Reviews invite custody advisement from councils that confuse lineage with parenting." Her laugh held no humor. "And because caste law allows biosecurity quarantine to separate empathic juveniles from family under the language of stabilization. Bryn destabilizes when separated. His body temperature falls, his heart rhythm desynchronizes, his sense channels flood." She looked directly at him, command stripped down to plain fear. "If they take him from me in this condition, they will call the decline unfortunate." The crux of it snapped into place so cleanly it made his teeth hurt. Everyone on this station could describe protocol. Almost no one would admit the trade-offs protocol concealed. A mother with sovereign rank and no practical safety. A child with legal protections that could be interpreted into harm. A corridor where a contractor's toolkit counted for more than high law because he was the only one physically present. Sully spoke from behind them. Very soft. "She hasn't slept since car escape. She goes still so we won't notice the shaking." Elira's eyes closed once, a brief surrender to being seen. When they opened, she did not rebuke Sully. Sienna lowered his voice further. "I can't fix neural feedback in a hallway. I can dampen it, reduce triggers, buy you function. But you have to let me set limits." "On me?" she asked. "On all of us, including me." Her ears tipped forward by a few degrees, the Fox equivalent of attention instead of challenge. "State them." "No loud command tones unless there's immediate breach. No sudden light changes if avoidable. You sit every 20 minutes for at least 3. Hydrate every cycle even if you hate it. If your hand locks, you tell me before you drop something sharp around children." He took a breath and chose honesty over deference. "And if Bryn starts hearing walls again, I need him in a shielded cocoon, not heroic denial." Bryn made a small sound at the word hearing, not offended, more like recognition. Mev moved closer to his brother. Taryn tested his new splint and gave Sienna a guarded nod, approval granted like a reluctant officer signing a requisition. Elira held his gaze another long second, then inclined her head, formal and almost courtly, despite the torn coat and burned sleeve. "Accepted, Technician Guardian." Her voice dropped to private register. "You may note this in your records. I did not disclose weakness. I disclosed operating constraints. Noted, Sienna said. Operating constraints are my native language. At 0331 station time, the deck gave a warning tremor and the climate strip jumped from amber to red in a single hard blink. Sienna pivoted before the alarm tone finished its first pulse. Positions, he said, and the word came out with convoy cadence, command without cruelty. Terran, wall seat, paw elevated. Mev with me, count breathing on my hand. Soli, you're my console eyes. Read me any number that turns red. Bryn, look at the heater mesh, not the ceiling. The corridor answered with strobing light and a dry gust through the vent seam, cold enough to bite through fabric. Bryn flinched hard, hands flying back to his ears. Elira started toward him, staggered half a step when her right hand spasmed, then caught herself on the bulkhead with her left. Sienna dropped to the regulator panel and ripped the faceplate free with a quarter turn and a curse. Inside, Relay B had gone from hot to scorched. Insulation bubbling where hidden bypass load had finally exceeded tolerance. He smelled cooked plastic and old dust, and the faint sweet edge that meant autofoam would deploy if he let it arc. Foam would smother the heater. No heater, no buffer, no safety band. Mev, he said, holding out 2 fingers without looking up. Count with me. In 4, hold 4, out 4. Loud enough for Bryn. Mev swallowed and obeyed. In 2, 3, 4. Sienna matched him, steadying his own pulse while stripping burned insulation with his teeth and gloved thumb. Soli, readouts. Temperature dropped 0.7 per minute. Humidity low. Vent pressure rising. Good eyes. Keep calling. He yanked a spare conductor from his kit, too short by 6 centimeters. Improvised the gap with the heater's diagnostic lead, twisted, capped, taped. Ugly but functional. He rerouted load from relay B to C, then bridged C through a service fuse rated for lights, not climate, calculating in the back of his skull how long before it failed warm instead of explosive. 9 minutes, if lucky. 6 if station kept throttling. Elira crouched beside Bryn now, left hand at the base of his neck, murmuring court dialect in a cadence lower than speech. Bryn's breathing stuttered, then synced to Mev's count for 2 cycles before slipping again as the lights strobed overhead. Need visual dampening, Sienna said. Soli silver thermal blanket. Silver. Terran, can you hold a corner with your good paw? Terran bared his teeth in a brave grin. Try me. Together, they built a low tent against the wall. Thermal blanket outside. Anti-static cargo wrap inside. Heater mesh at one end diffused through 2 layers, so warmth came soft and even. Sienna clipped the anti-static wrap to a grounded bolt on the bulkhead, creating a crude Faraday shade to blunt the electromagnetic chatter bleeding from stressed conduits. Not elegant, not textbook, but the scanner showed ambient spike noise dropping by 14% the moment he sealed the last edge. Bryn, he said, kneeling at tent height. You're not in trouble. This is a quiet cave. You can come out whenever you want. Bryn looked to Elira first. She touched her forehead briefly to his, then nodded. He crawled inside, curled around his hydration pack, and for the first time since Sienna had entered Ring 9, his shoulders loosened all the way down. The regulator spat one shower of sparks. Sienna slapped the panel side with his palm and jammed a ceramic spacer under the relay stack to stop vibration chatter. Soli, temp. Dropping slower. 0.2 now. Mev, breathing. Mev kept counting, voice hoarse but disciplined. Out. 2. 3. 4. Perfect, keep it. Sienna keyed his sleeve to the skiff AI. Run maintenance drone telemetry on Dock Ring 9 airflow origin. I need source ID and control path. The filing cabinet voice came through tinny but prompt. Telemetry complete. Unauthorized airflow link originates at Magistrate Administration Manifold. Subchannel signed CareX office key. Confidence 96%. Package and append to tribunal chain with this timestamp. Completed. External archive confirms receipt. Outcome in hand, not hope. Good. He sealed the panel with 2 screws instead of 4 so he could reopen it fast, then sat back on his heels and let himself scan the room as a whole. Taryn leaned against the wall, splinted paw propped and stable. Mev still counted, now quieter, glancing toward Bryn between breaths. Soli had transformed into a one-child command center, feeding numbers with crisp accuracy and repositioning hydration packs by order of need. Illyra remained crouched beside the blanket cave, posture regal even at floor level, right hand trembling less now that she had finally stopped forcing it to perform. Sienna offered her a hydration pouch. Cycle. She took it without argument and drank. Again in 10 minutes, he said. You issue orders comfortably for a contractor. You hired me under fire. Refunds are unavailable. A tired laugh escaped her before she could suppress it. It changed her face in a way rank never could, not softer exactly, more human in the broad sense of exhausted people choosing humor over despair. By 3:46, the light strobe had flattened to a steady dim. Temperature held within survivable band. Vent pressure normalized enough that thermal tape at the seam fluttered only once every full cycle instead of twitching like nerves. Sienna logged every change, tagged each fix as temporary, and sent one more evidence packet to remote archive until his chain looked less like panic and more like architecture. When he finally rose, his knees protested and his gloves were blackened at the fingertips. He flexed his hands, checked the corridor one more time, and returned to the privacy line out of habit and respect. Inside the improvised quiet cave, Bryn had fallen asleep with one hand still wrapped around the drinking valve. Mev leaned against Soli's shoulder, counting gone to whisper. Taryn watched Sienna with open appraisal now, no longer deciding whether he was real, deciding what kind of real. Illyra stood slowly, using the wall for balance she pretended she did not need. You kept the line, she said. Sienna looked at the patched panel, the blanket cave, the row of warm packs like tiny lanterns in a hostile corridor. For this cycle, she agreed. And in her voice the phrase sounded less temporary than it had any right to be. Sienna stayed at the privacy line long enough to make sure the regulator patch held, then opened his palm toward Illyra in a silent request for the scanner. She gave it back with her left hand, and when her right fingers twitched against her coat seam, he pretended to adjust his own cuff so she would not have to hide the motion from the kits. The corridor smelled less like burning insulation now and more like hot metal and broth concentrate, a maintenance victory measured in small mercies. Behind the silver blanket cave, Bryn slept in uneven waves, ears flicking at each change in vent tone. Mev matched those shifts with instinctive glances, while Soli kept one hand on her brother's ankle and the other wrapped around a data slate she had no access rights to and no intention of surrendering. At 0349 station time, your relay bridge has drifted 3%, Soli said, eyes narrowed at Sienna's sleeve display. Is that acceptable? Or are we pretending to be calm? He looked over, genuinely impressed. Acceptable for 12 minutes, annoying for 13, dangerous after 15. You just earned assistant engineer status. Soli's mouth flattened in suspicious pride. Does assistant engineer outrank magistrates? Emotionally, yes. Legally, no. Terrence snorted and shifted his splinted paw with a hiss through his teeth. Mev immediately leaned in to help him reposition without being asked. The motion was practiced, sibling choreography shaped by too many emergencies. Elira tracked all 4 kits at once, then lowered herself onto a storage case as if sitting were a tactical concession rather than fatigue. The torn edge of her ceremonial coat exposed the underside of her forearm guard, where faint geometric lines pulsed and faded in a rhythm that matched the tremor in her hand. Interface burn. Sienna had seen military signalers carry similar patterns after overclocked shield work, though none had done it while holding children under active threat. "Show me," he said quietly, keeping his voice pitched below the kit's conversation. Her ears angled back. "You are direct. I'm trying not to waste your strength on etiquette." For 1 second, she looked ready to refuse on principle. Then she rolled the damaged sleeve up to the elbow and set her arm across her knee. The skin beneath the fur was unbroken, but the neural tracery shimmered in unstable sequences, the kind of feedback that made fine motor control unreliable and decision fatigue brutal. He scanned in silence, watching the numbers write a familiar disaster in clinical language. "Any med auto-injector in your travel kit?" he asked. 2, both sedative heavy. Then we save them for seizure threshold. I can mix you a lighter buffer from station med salts and glucose." "You can?" "Convoy medics taught drivers because drivers kept pretending they were indestructible." "Were they?" "Only while unconscious." That almost smile returned, brief and sharp. "Your humor is badly timed." "It's the only kind I own." He moved to his toolkit, measured powder by gram into a warm hydration pouch, and handed it over. She took 1 swallow, grimaced, then drank the rest without complaint. The kits noticed. Taran lifted his own pack and mirrored her. Mev followed. Sully nudged a fresh pouch toward the blanket cave and murmured until Bryn's hand emerged and accepted it. The corridor noise dipped into a low mechanical hush, the false peace that came when large systems paused before issuing a command. Sienna felt it in his sternum, more than his ears. He checked his evidence queue again, then opened the message from maintenance control he had half expected and half dreaded. Inspection. Crew. Request closed. Administrative priority. Override. Magistrate Carex. No crew. No observer. Contact outcome complete. Dismissed by hierarchy. He flicked the message into the shared side of his display and angled it toward Elira. Your inspection team got promoted to Vapor. She read it once. Carex. You know him. I know the type. Protocol as a weapon, contamination language as leash. Good. I prefer enemies with repetitive habits. She set the empty pouch down and looked at him with a steadier focus than she had managed since he entered Ring 9. Technician Guardian, we need a contingency phrase. He blinked. For what exactly? For the moment, I cannot issue formal command and my children must obey you immediately. The words landed heavy. Trust in this corridor had been practical so far, built from warm packs and repaired relays. This was different. This was authority transfer, personal and political in one breath. He chose care over speed. If we use one, it needs to be short, distinct, not likely in ordinary conversation. Taran, Elira said without taking her eyes off Sienna. Suggest. Taran sat up straighter despite the pain. Copper line. Mev frowned. Too common in station manuals. Soli tapped her slate. Use paired words from 2 languages so no one else says it by accident. Bryn's voice came soft from inside the blanket cave, sleepy but clear. Starden. Silence held for a beat. Then Elira's ears lifted with unmistakable approval. Starden, she repeated. If I say it, you move when Sienna says move. No argument. 4 small heads nodded in sequence. Sienna felt the shape of the moment settle around him, awkward and sacred and very far from any contract he had signed. He raised his hand, palm up, waiting for consent. Elira placed her left hand over his wrist in Fox Oath custom, then, after a fractional hesitation, let her right fingertips rest on the back of his glove, despite the tremor. Fur warm, pulse fast, deliberate contact. "By Regent Transit Clause and House Claim," she said, voice low but carrying to the kits. "Sienna Okonkwo holds line authority while we remain confined. Harm to him is harm to us." Mev inhaled sharply. Soli stared as if recalculating the entire social order. Taryn dipped his chin with formal seriousness. Bryn, still half inside the blanket cave, reached out and touched the toe of Sienna's boot, like sealing a circuit. Sienna swallowed, against an unexpected tightness in his throat. "Copy that," he said, because anything more ceremonial would have broken him. "And for record accuracy, I accept." The station chose that second to announce itself with a hard, triple chime that cut through the corridor like a blade through wire. All wall displays flashed white, then flooded crimson text across every panel in 3 scripts. Biosecurity, escalation, containment protocol, ASH. All dependent organisms to be transferred to sanitary custody. Contractor personnel to submit for interrogative hold. Mev was on his feet before the final line rendered. Taryn cursed in a tight, adolescent whisper and tried to stand too fast, nearly losing balance. Soli grabbed Bryn and pulled him from the blanket cave, pressing him into her side. Bryn's pupils blew wide again, breath stuttering as the red lights strobed against his face. Sienna moved to the corridor center and brought up his palms, voice sharp and even. "Eyes on me. Count. In for 4. They followed because training plus fear sometimes equaled obedience. Elira rose with a predatory stillness that made the air feel suddenly narrower. "ASH cannot be invoked without cross-seal from diplomatic court." "Tell that to the man with admin override," Sienna said, already sweeping his scanner toward the outer hatch. The comm grill crackled, and a male voice rolled through with polished contempt, wrapped in civic formality. "Ambassador Regent Voss, by authority of Dock Magistracy and Public Health Ordinance, you will surrender juvenile dependents for independent screening. Contractor Okonkwo will stand down and place hands on bulkhead." "Carex," Elira said, and his name in her mouth sounded like a diagnosis. "Regent," the voice replied. "Your cooperation will be recorded favorably." Sienna checked the hatch feed. 3 security drones had locked into a wedge outside Dock Ring 9, projectors warming, restraint webs armed. Behind them stood 2 marshals in sealed armor with visors down, weapons lowered, but live. Not a raid posture yet, a seizure posture. He opened a public channel and spoke clearly for every recorder in range. "This is Technician Guardian Sienna Okonkwo, registry attached. I contest Protocol ASH as procedurally invalid due to active diplomatic immunity and documented sabotage risk linked to magistrate manifold signatures. Evidence chain already mirrored to tribunal archive." Carex did not miss a beat. "Obstruction by contractor class noted. Additional penalty applied." "Bureaucracy really is your love language," Sienna muttered, then louder. "Transmit your biohazard assay ID and originating lab." No answer came for 2 seconds, which was answer enough. Elira stepped beside him, shoulder nearly touching his. "Open my court channel," she said. "Need your cipher token." She pulled a narrow signet from beneath her torn cuff, pressed it into his glove, and said, "Do not drop that. It outranks half this station." "Only half. On generous days." He keyed the signet into his sleeve port. The interface rejected once, recalibrated to Fox script then bloomed with royal encryption bands. Carex's voice cut back in, tighter now. Unauthorized access to region keying is treason adjacent. Step away from that console. Elira ignored him and began speaking in rapid court dialect, each phrase clipped to legal precision. Sienna caught only fragments, but the effects were immediate. Outer drone projectors paused mid-charge. Hatch control switched from magistrate red to judicial amber. A new voice, synthetic and impartial, overrode the channel. Emergency injunction acknowledged. Armed transfer suspended pending dual jurisdiction review. Mev let out a shaky sound that might have been a laugh if terror had not crushed it halfway. Carex came back hard, composure cracking. Suspend nothing. Execute Ash under contamination uncertainty. Seal the ring. Sienna saw the trap an instant before it sprang. Locked teeth in the far utility door cycled without command. A tiny metallic clink sounded from the beverage alcove camera wedge, followed by the dry hiss of a microcharge igniter. He took one step toward it. Elira did not shout. She moved. Her left hand hooked the back of his harness and yanked him sideways behind the armored service pedestal with force that rattled his teeth. The charge popped in the alcove, venting a cone of concussive foam and shrapnel-sized composite fragments across the space where his chest had been. Panels screamed. Lights died to emergency blue. Bryn cried out once, high and raw, then buried his face in Sully's shoulder. Sienna hit the deck on one knee, ears ringing, the signet still clamped in his fist. He looked up at Elira. She stood over him, breathing hard, right hand shaking violently now, but left hand steady as a drawn blade. "Stay behind me for 3 seconds," she said. He stared, stunned despite himself. "That was one," she snapped, already pivoting toward the console. "Move when I say." He moved. Together they crossed the corridor in a low sprint, while Terran and Mev dragged the thermal blanket rack into a barrier and solely guided Bryn behind it, calm voice breaking only at the edges. Sienna slammed his toolkit onto the console lip, patched power from the heater cells into the dead comm strip, and fed the Regent Signet channel back online. Elira planted her palm on the sensor plate, spoke one final command in court dialect, and the station answered with a sound like a vault deciding who counted. "Jurisdiction transfer complete," the synthetic voice declared. "Dock Ring 9 placed under temporary Regent protective custody. Magistrate override denied." Outside the hatch, drone projectors powered down in reluctant sequence. Inside the ring, everyone kept breathing as if they had just remembered how. Sienna got his boots under him, shoved ringing out of his ears, and did the fastest triage sweep of his life. Terran's splint still held. Mev had a foam streak across one sleeve and no punctures. Soli's hands shook but stayed useful. One arm wrapped around Bryn while the other kept the thermal blanket braced like a shield. Elira stood with her left shoulder forward and her right hand trembling openly now, no energy left for concealment. The corridor lights stayed emergency blue, painting everyone in submarine shadows. "You hurt?" he asked the kits. Foreheads shook in uneven sequence. "Good. Stay low. No one crosses that line unless Elira says." He turned to the alcove blast site. The concussive foam had hardened into pale ridges along the wall, and composite shards glittered on the deck like ground ice. He pulled the flat black scanner from his kit, swept residue, snapped photos with forensic timestamps, and bagged 3 fragments in sterile sleeves. One shard still carried a partial serial etch. That alone could sink somebody's career. Combined with everything else, it could drown it. Elira watched him work, breath still hard. "You are collecting under fire." "I'm collecting so this doesn't become a debate about my tone." Her ears twitched once in grim agreement. Sienna patched heater cell power into the comm spine again and opened a high-priority legal channel through her signet. Tribunal Archive, live intake request, addendum to existing chain, incident index ring 9. The synthetic clerk voice answered at once, cooler than vacuum. Live intake open. Confirm witness class. Primary witness 1, contractor. Primary witness 2, regent. 4 juvenile witnesses, protected status. A delay then. Confirmed. All linked evidence packets received. Chain integrity preserved. Outside the hatch, the drones had gone still, but the marshals hadn't moved. Sienna keyed external audio. Marshal unit at ring 9. This is Technician Guardian Okonkwo under temporary regent custody order. We have an active sabotage scene. Request neutral entry team with sealed kits. One marshal responded, voice filtered through helmet speakers. Request logged. Awaiting judicial counterseal. Kirex cut back in before Sienna could answer, his voice raw with contained rage. There is no sabotage scene. There is a contaminated corridor and a contractor exceeding legal competence. Sienna muted his channel long enough to mutter, "Man talks like a tax form with teeth," then unmuted. "Magistrate, submit your biohazard assay ID now." Silence again. Elira leaned toward the pickup and switched to court diction, so precise it made Sienna's translated subtitles lag. Doc Magistrate Kirex, you have invoked Protocol Ash without assay origin, without dual seal, and after documented targeting of diplomatic transit. Submit chain or accept contempt. Kirex answered in station common this time, discarding polish. I will not be dictated to by a compromised regent and her hired mechanic. The tribunal clerk cut in. Statement logged. By first shift change, the station had rotated from night labor to day bureaucracy, and the tone of every channel sharpened with new supervisors listening. The judicial counterseal landed with an audible chirp. Hatch lock cycled to amber, then green. 2 neutral marshals entered in sterile capes, scanning as they moved, not pointing weapons at anyone. One kneeled at the blast site and lifted the same serial-marked shard Sienna had bagged. The other requested the alcove camera feed. Feed was looped, Sienna said. I tagged repetition artifact earlier. Dust mode drift repeated on 6-second cycle. The marshal looked up, surprised despite protocol. You caught that by eye? By boredom and paranoia. He passed over every physical item in order, narrating chain custody, while the tribunal clerk recorded hatch magnetic residue swabs, detonite trace from lock teeth, tooling scrape sample from utility door, thermal tape strip showing unauthorized airflow direction, relay panel photos with bypass loop, manifold telemetry naming Kirex office key, audio transcript of maintenance control denying independent inspection, blast fragments from alcove microcharge. Nothing stayed in his pockets. Nothing stayed vague. The marshal sealed the final evidence tube and stamped it with judicial ink. All items received. Contractor Okonkwo. Your documentation is cleaner than most internal teams. Low bar, but appreciated. Elira stepped forward before fatigue folded her posture. Add this. Magistrate Kirex demanded juvenile surrender after threat event and attempted to trigger lock seal with charge placement in a camera blind. Added, the clerk said. Sienna glanced at the kits. Taryn had inched closer to the conversation, jaw hard. Mev stood half in front of Bryn without noticing he was doing it. Soli kept one hand on the pouch of med salt Sienna had mixed for Elira, tracking dose intervals like she had promoted herself twice already. The marshal at the door touched 2 fingers to his visor. Control Deus feed is live for detention execution if complainant requests witness view. Elira did not look away from the comm grill. Request granted. The wall panel split into a remote image of magistrate control. Kirex stood at his dais in ceremonial black, collar pins still in place, flanked by 3 officers who looked like they wished to be anywhere else. His expression carried the brittle certainty of a man who had always been obeyed. The tribunal clerk spoke without emotion. Doc Magistrate Carex, by immediate judicial review, you are suspended pending treason inquiry under Accord 12 and child endangerment adjunct under Station Civil Code. All protocol privileges are now revoked. His collar pins dimmed one by one. He lunged for the console anyway. 2 Accord marshals moved in, twisted his wrists behind him, and secured bind cuffs with magnetic locks. No spectacle, no shouting. Just authority changing hands in real time. Carex's mouth moved around words the audio feed did not bother to prioritize. Mev exhaled like he had been holding air since the first alarm. Taryn's ears lifted, then dropped with delayed relief. Sully closed her eyes for 1 full second and opened them steadier. Bryn pressed his forehead into Elira's hip and stayed there. Sienna realized his own shoulders had climbed toward his ears and forced them down. 3 hours later, under tribunal strip lights that smelled of recycled air and old paper, Sienna sat at a witness station in a borrowed clean shirt while his maintenance jacket dried in an evidence locker. The hearing moved fast because the chain was airtight and the politics were ugly enough that delay looked like complicity. The maintenance controller with the tired voice appeared by hollow and confirmed the denied inspection request, including admin override source. A forensic tech matched the utility door scrape residue to a magistracy tool set signed out under Carex's authorization token. The alcove shard serial traced to a restricted demolition lot accessible only to security-grade administrators. The missing biohazard assay never materialized because it had never existed. When Carex tried to frame the reroute as clerical error, the tribunal pulled up the original manifest audit. 7-minute reroute stamp, no negotiation log, passenger tier mismatch, and manual suppression of escort assignment. Deliberate, not accidental. Elira testified standing, one hand on the rail, voice even despite visible fatigue. She did not dramatize. She did not beg. She laid out sequence, causality, and risk like an officer briefing a battlefield map. When she reached the part where Bryn's empathic regulation depended on proximity and warmth, she simply said, "Separation would have constituted foreseeable harm, and let the room sit with its own shame." The verdict entered before station noon. Conviction on sabotage, abuse of protocol authority, and attempted unlawful seizure under false biosecurity pretext. Privileges stripped permanently. Sentence transferred to Accord custody. After the gavel tone, Sienna expected a clerk to hand him a fine. Instead, a debt officer in gray approached his station with a tablet and neutral face. Contractor Okonkwo. Tribunal has issued corrective relief for wrongful hazard assignment and successful protective action under diplomatic clause. Your liability flags are cleared for this incident. Existing debt slate reduction, 38%. He blinked at her. Did you say reduction? I did. Can you repeat it so my nervous system believes you? She almost smiled. 38% reduction. Confirm with thumbprint. He pressed his thumb to the pad before reality changed its mind. By the time they exited the tribunal wing, station afternoon had begun and the promenade smelled like expensive coffee trying to overpower machine oil from lower decks. The kits walked in a tight diamond around Elira, each carrying something specific because children steadied faster when given tasks. Taryn held the med packet and refused help with his splint. Mev carried the folded thermal blanket like a battle trophy. Sully guarded the evidence receipt copies in a sealed sleeve. Bryn carried Sienna's spare screwdriver in both hands as if entrusted with royal hardware. At the transit lock, Elira halted and turned to Sienna. Without audience and without ceremony voices, she looked more tired than regal, and more formidable for it. Hausfoss transport departs in 40 minutes, she said. I can return your signet access and conclude transit claim, or I can make a different offer. Sienna held her gaze. What offer? Formal post. Convoy engineer to my household route. Legal protections reciprocal. Pay above station contractor scale. Medical access. Education allotment for any dependents you name in future filings. Her ears angled forward. Duties include systems oversight, crisis response, and telling me when protocol is being used as a weapon. He let out one short breath that might have been a laugh. So exactly this, but with better tools. And fewer ambush alcoves, Mev put in. Soli glanced at him. Statistically fewer. Terran lifted his splinted paw. Can he keep making bad jokes in command spaces? Illyra's mouth twitched. It appears to be integral to his method. Bryn stepped forward and offered the screwdriver up to Sienna, solemn as any oath. Starred an engineer, he said. The phrase hit Sienna square in the chest. He crouched, took the tool, and tapped it lightly against his own wristplate, like sealing a contract. Then yes, he said, standing. I accept the post. Illyra moved closer and, in full view of the lock cameras, touched her brow briefly to his shoulder in Fox Oath custom, the same gesture she had rationed in crisis now given in daylight. Pack trusted, she said, by law and by witness. Sienna did not have Fox language for what that did to him, so he answered in his own. Then I'll keep the corridor. They boarded together through a gate that opened on the first scan. No alarms, no stutter cadence, no one calling him contractor like it meant disposable. At the threshold, he looked back once at Dock Ring 9 listed on a distant maintenance map. One patched crescent among thousands of steel wounds and repairs. The strange details that had nearly killed them were no longer rumors in a hallway. They were archived, ruled on, and answered. The lock engaged behind them with a deep hydraulic thud. This time, it sounded like safety.